All right. Yeah, this is a weird one. How Bob Dylan and Paul Simon's rivalry began. Did not know them two had a rivalry. Now, it could just be competition, two songwriters. It could be that. But then I was also thinking it could be something to do with, didn't they do Scarborough Fair and Girl from the North Country? Maybe Dylan released Girl from the North Country and then they did Scarborough Fair. Um, mm. But then, yeah, I could just be completely barking up the wrong tree. So let's see what the beef was over. Let's go. Oh, and I remember doing a video about war and saying the war isn't the war isn't the action of rich people that want war. It's human nature. And until we actually address the fact that it's in our nature to fight and stop thinking it's someone else doing it, then it's never ever going to go away. But I have proof. One is my mum and dad, who are old. My dad's 70, my mum's late 60s. Yeah, they go to a bowls club, and bowls is full of old people, but they all beef each other. My mum rings up, she tells me all the drama. Even old people playing bowls, there's infighting, do you know what I mean? Bitchiness and what have you. And then take this. In most music things, there's always a rivalry between two artists. And you can say that's a result of record labels promoting that, but it's not just as simple, because when that's dangled, what is what is it about humans that are so quick to divide and fight? It's just in our nature, but then it's in animals' nature too. We are animals. We think we're above animals, and we're not. But anyway, that's a whole different thing. But that was a side note of the fact that you got Bob Dylan and Paul Simon, who are songwriters, but they are beefing. But yeah, let's just go.
Why was Bob Dylan giggling through a Simon and Garfunkel show? And did Dylan pretend not to know who Simon was? There may never be a bridge over these troubled waters. Paul Simon and Bob Dylan penned some of the most beloved songs of the 1960s and 1970s, and both musicians continue to produce vital works to this day. These two songwriting luminaries didn't always get along, though. As Simon told Rolling Stone in 2011, "I usually come in second to Dylan, and I don't like coming in second." The feud began when Simon and Art Garfunkel sat on the stage of...
You do. I'm sorry. I know people may disagree because Dylan's not as loved as he should be. And that's more his fault because he really turned away from that fame. But, yeah, I'm sorry to any Simon and Garfunkel fans, but they didn't get close to Dylan.
Coming in second. The feud began when Simon and Art Garfunkel sat on the stage of Gerde's Folk City in Manhattan's Greenwich Village in March 1964. It was a big show for Simon and Garfunkel, who were about to finish recording their debut album Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. for Columbia Records. With Simon playing guitar while he and Garfunkel sang together, a harsh nasal laugh cut through their close harmonies. It was impossible to miss, and Simon could see that the laugh came from Bob Dylan, who was sitting at the bar talking with the New York Times music critic Robert Shelton. It's worth noting that, at least according to Shelton, he and Dylan weren't laughing at Simon and Garfunkel's performance. Instead, he insists the pair were just in a giggly mood under the influence of alcohol. Regardless, the occurrence bothered Simon quite a bit. According to Paul Simon, The Life, Simon was angry not only because the men interrupted his show, but because he looked up to Dylan as a songwriter. Reportedly, Simon had loved Dylan's music since hearing his first album in 1962. He and Garfunkel even included one of Dylan's songs, The Times They Are A-Changin', on their debut album. This would prove the first stone thrown in a decades-long rivalry that wouldn't end until the turn of the 21st century. Bob Dylan and Paul Simon had first met not long before that fateful concert, when Carla Ruotolo, the sister to Dylan's girlfriend, Susie Ruotolo, had introduced them. According to Bob Dylan, Outlaw Blues, the meeting didn't go well. Both men were awkward and didn't say much to one another. Naturally, the incident at the concert made things worse. In the aftermath of the concert, Simon got back at his rival, or at least that's how it came across to many. Simon released his first solo record, the Paul Simon Songbook, in the United Kingdom in 1965. The record featured a track called A Simple Desultory Philippic, or How I Was Lyndon Johnson in a Submission, which seemed to parody Dylan's music and lyrics.
You guys are idiots. This song is very deep.
A version of the song would later appear on Simon and Garfunkel's third album, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme. Despite those tensions, Simon respected Dylan, especially early on. He told Rolling Stone, "In the very, very beginning, when we were first signed to Columbia, I really admired Dylan's work. The Sound of Silence wouldn't have been written if it weren't for Dylan. But I left that feeling around The Graduate and Mrs. Robinson. They weren't folky anymore." Despite his admiration, Paul Simon made fun of Bob Dylan for going electric and helping to kick off the folk rock explosion. According to Homeward Bound, The Life of Paul Simon, he even did a brief Dylan impression on stage. Dylan, for his part, responded by pretending not to know who Simon even was. In May 1966, he told New Musical Express he'd never heard of him. Over the years, though, Dylan and Simon began to admit a grudging respect for one another. In a 1984 radio interview, Dylan admitted, "Paul Simon's written some good songs. I think America is a good song. I think The Boxer is a good song. I think Bridge Over Troubled Water is a good song. I mean, he's written a lot of bad songs too, but everybody's done that." In 1999, the pair went on tour together, though it got some mixed reviews. Rolling Stone even critiqued the pair's joint set, calling it half historic, half train wreck. Regardless, the two iconic musicians seem to have buried the hatchet. That said, Simon did reach out to Dylan for a duet on Simon's 2011 solo composition, So Beautiful or So What. In particular, Simon said Dylan's older voice would fit perfectly on one of the track's verses. However, as Simon told Uncut that year, Dylan never responded to him about the collaboration, and to this day, Simon doesn't know why. So after everything, there may still be some bad blood between the two songwriters.
But that's the thing. That's how big Dylan is now. Because I remember, who was it? Phil Collins didn't like Paul McCartney because Paul McCartney didn't give him enough of a fanfare when they met. But like, yeah, when you're as big as Phil Collins, most people are desperate to talk to you. But when you're Paul McCartney, you do outrank that. He's just to you, he's just another songwriter. But that's probably what Dylan's thing was of like turning him down. It yeah. It probably wasn't meant as a disrespect. It's just that I'm sure Paul Simon would have a lot of people that would have jumped on that. But Dylan's Dylan, and he's his own man, and doesn't mean he's gonna, yeah. And also with Dylan, he's always gonna do what you least expect him to. But I'd imagine that tour that they did together was probably a train wreck more because of Dylan. Because I think Dylan became to when he got booed, and you can see him deteriorate over that tour when they was booing him for going rock. I think he really got a almost like a vendetta against the audience, and I think he's always kind of kept that kind of grudge. It's always seemed to me that after Dylan when he was younger really wanted to be famous, and the second he got it, I think he realised, oh no, this isn't what I thought, and then I think he spent pretty much the rest of his career trying to turn people off of him. But yeah, it seems, well, it's a misunderstanding at first. And maybe that, again, because Paul Simon admired Bob Dylan so much, that it's kind of what it's like when someone you admire says something, it holds more weight. And as a musician, you kind of want the people that inspired you to like you. And your height, you have a heightened sensitivity to what they're saying. And I think as well with musicians, like they say, your biggest critic is themselves. So when Dylan laughed, it's almost like assuring them doubts that you have about yourself, even though the laugh was nothing to do with anything really. But then I also think that there is a competition because um, I would say they're in the same league of great songwriters. Like, there's no doubt that Paul Simon is one of the greatest songwriters of all time. Um, Real two heavyweights when it comes to songwriting. Actually, I want to do some more Simon and Garfunkel because I did start when I started this channel again. I started with some Simon and Garfunkel, but I haven't done any for ages. I wouldn't mind digging deeper into that catalogue. So yeah, if anyone made it this far, email me some Simon and Garfunkel. But yeah, Let me know what you think of that rivalry. But yeah, sweet.